All right, we're a minute out from 10:05, so we're going to go ahead and start with just an introduction. My name is Anna Hughes. I am the Director of Trusts with the Arc of Northern Virginia. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Cortney Heykoop with Cloverleaf Financial today, as we'll be covering preparing the next generation of care for your loved one. And so just some information before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded and will later upload to our YouTube channel with the Arc of Northern Virginia. We'll also go ahead and allocate time at the end of the session where we're going to be answering questions. There are two ways that you can ask questions. So the first one being, you're welcome to put a question into the chat or into the Q&A chat, if you will. And if you do so, I'll be sure to read the question aloud to Cortney at the end of the webinar, and she can get some good information out to you all. The alternative is, if you'd prefer to ask your question aloud, you're welcome to react, raise your hand, and at the end of the session, I'll be sure to make a note, unmute you so that you can ask the question aloud, and Cortney, again, will provide that same information to make sure your questions are answered. So without further ado, Cortney, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for having me, Anna. Good morning, all. I saw some names in the participants list that I recognize, so good morning to you. And my name is, like Anna said, I'm Cortney Heykoop. I am a financial advisor and chartered special needs consultant with Cloverleaf Wealth Strategies. I started my firm 6 years ago, although I've been in the industry for more years than I want to admit, because of the lovely young lady there in green that you see on my screen. Those are my older two. They are both 20 now. We adopted Lil when she was 2. And when I went back to work after, being out of the finance world for about 5 years, I realized that there were not a lot of financial advisors that really helped families like mine, and really understood Medicaid and Social Security and special needs trusts. And while I continue to learn something new every single day, and by no means have it all down, it's really been my pleasure and my mission to work with families like ours and helping to prepare for our future and that of our child. And that's really what we're talking about today, is preparing that next generation for care. I think all of our greatest fears is what will happen to my kid once I'm gone, right? And we need to think of that in kind of two avenues. In an emergency situation is, if God forbid, I'm hit by a bus on my way to work, and I don't come home today, what happens? And then also, as we age, what does that look like when we're no longer able to be that primary caregiver, and when we're eventually gone? Who will that be? Will it be a sibling? So you see there Ronan in the picture with Lil. What does that look like? What do they need to know? How do we prepare that next generation? And that's really what we're talking about today. I can get my cursor. There we go. So today is an information seminar. We are not talking about, well, we do talk about legal topics, and we talk about accounting topics. I am not an accountant or an attorney. So we work very closely together, but you always want to get that, run by the person that you work with. And I'm not here to sell anything specific today. I am just here to provide information and guidance, and really to get you started thinking about how this works in your family. So it's going to be one of those days, ladies and gentlemen. Our objectives today: determining who that best caregiver is, or caregivers, understanding that person or person's role. What do we need to do to educate and support that caregiver now so that they're prepared for it? Transitioning, creating that care plan, and also transitioning into that care plan, and then just some resources and tools for us all. So let's start talking about determining the best caregiver, right? So, we think about that and as I said, in kind of two scenarios. What happens if that happens now and what happens in the future. And we want to prepare our legal documents and our transition of care plan for both scenarios, right? If something happened to me today, Lily's brother's 20. He's not in any position to be the one that would be able to help support her. Maybe that for a while is still grandma or aunt and uncle. But if we're looking down the road to, when Ronan and Lily are in their 60s and then I'm in my late 70s, that's going to be different, right? So we want to make sure we're thinking kind of throughout our child's lifetime. And we also want to make sure that we are flexible in our expectations of that next generation. The first bullet point here to really start thinking about is emotional and physical readiness. And keeping in mind too the dynamics of your family, right? Um, what is that relationship between Lily and her brother? Would maybe it make sense in the future that it is her sister who's not of age yet? Maybe in the future, my younger child may be the one that has the emotional intelligence and also the physical capability of helping Lily. Proximity is also a big one. If we're talking about siblings and siblings end up moving out of the area, what will that look like for our child if our child has to relocate in the future? That's specifically something to consider when it comes into Medicaid waivers that are state specific, right? Willingness is also a big one, right? There is, the feeling of, okay, this is my responsibility and I will do it versus this is something I want to do, right? So if you're choosing between multiple people, willingness is a huge factor to consider. Because somebody who may do it just because they feel they're responsible, it may be more of a burden, and that's going to come through in how they care for our child, right? And really understanding what our child's needs are. And actually, as I kind of say all of this, remember that you can change it, right? What you set in place now may not make sense in 10, 20 years. That's why we update things, right? So we don't want to not make a plan because we're afraid it's going to change. Don't get stuck. Make a plan based on what we know today, okay? And that comes down to our child's needs. Like that's really what made me think of it, because what my child needs today at 20 may be very different than what she needs at 40 and what she needs at 60, right? So really understanding what she needs so that we can put that in the transition plan now so that it's there, right? And that we're able to communicate those needs. Compatibility with the child's personality, right? Like, it's funny. I look at my three kids, right? So Lily's in the middle. She has two great bookends to support her. Her younger sister, and this may change by the time they're in their 40s, right? One's 14 and one's 20 now, developmentally probably right there on the same level. They clash, right? Like would not be a good compatibility situation under the current dynamics. Ronan, on the other hand, he says jump and Lily's answer is how high, right? They were raised as twins. She came into the household. They're both 2 years old and he knew everything, or he still thinks he knows everything. But he taught her how to play. He taught her how to eat. He was that role model for her. So that compatibility from a support system might be a better fit, right? Just because of personalities, even though Ainsley would probably be a lot kinder. Ainsley would probably be a lot more responsible. He she will listen to Ronan more, right? So, you know, I'm sharing my situation with you here all because those are all things that we as parents think about, right? And weigh and consider. And so that's really the goal of today is starting to think of those things so that you can create the plan that's best for you and your family. Stability, in lifestyle and finances, right? Like me having Ronan at the age of 20 take over his sister's care right now would not be a good idea, right? He's a junior in college. Like he is not in anywhere. I have a hard time managing on a day-to-day basis. I couldn't ask that of him at this stage in his life, right? He also doesn't have the finances to support himself, let alone her at this point, even with the special needs trust that we have set up, and the financial knowledge to handle all of that at this point. Um, I alluded to proximity and accessibility earlier, but that is really big, especially with the Medicaid waivers. Some states are easier to move to than others, of course. I recently had a client who was told in Pennsylvania that because they're on a waiver in Virginia, they would get a priority wait to get services in Pennsylvania. And I had never heard that before from switching to PA. So, you know, hopefully, as you know, things will become easier in the future. I'm not super hopeful of that because, you know, states are very much state specific and Medicaid is a state specific program. But it would be nice if there was more ability to move between states, especially as our kids age. But for right now, we need to plan on what that would look like if our child changed states and had to then wait for services. And that could impact how much is needed in a special needs trust or how, you know, what supports the caregiver in the new state is going to need. Because that support system, that's the next thing here, for whomever that caregiver is incredibly important, right? You know, Lily's been home with us for 18 years now. I've created a good support system, right? I know people at the Arc of Northern Virginia, the Arc of Loudon. I go to a mom's, it's not really a support group, but it's a support group every Wednesday a month at Simply Be Coffee in Leesburg, right? And yesterday when we were, or this week when we were there, I vented a little bit, right? I've had a rough week. And those moms all get it. So what support network will that next generation need? And how do they find it? And what resources do we need to provide them with? And the last one here in determining the best caregiver is really who can communicate and advocate well, right? You know, I remember thinking when Lily left high school, she graduated in the 4 years she wanted to be done. And I went out and celebrated my last IEP meeting, right? I went out to lunch with some friends. We had some drinks. We toasted. You know, I felt like I wanted to burn all the papers. I didn't because, yes, I know we need them. But it was a celebration, right? And then we started talking to DARS for work, and I got an IEP, an individual employment plan, right? Like I just traded one for the other. But I have to advocate and fight just as much now in the employment sector as I did in the education sector. So you need somebody who can advocate well, right? Who is going to be able to speak up and fight for what your child needs. So you really want to look at what that role will be, right? So we talked about, you know, the steps in determining them, but part of that is also going to kind of define what their role is, because that's going to be different depending upon our child's needs, right? So when that one bullet point that we said, you know, looking at what the needs are is going to really determine the level of support and the role of that caregiver. And so that leads me into the next approach, and that is a team approach. Um, we see this often when maybe, there isn't a family or sibling situation that can take over, and we have an only child and family members that, they don't want to burden one person. Um, and so maybe you create a team approach. And that can be done. It can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done by all the finances are handed by one person and the guardianship and personal care is handled by another. That's just done through the legal documents, right? One person's the trustee, one person's the guardian, we're set. Um, Also in supported decision making, a lot of times different areas of life have different supports for your child. So that can be built in. Um, I have had more and more clients looking at micro boards, and this is really where um there isn't a obvious next caregiver built in the case of an only child or a very small family. And it really gives that collaborative approach to care. It does share that responsibility so one person is not incredibly burdened. It creates an immediate support system between those people, right? Um, it can reduce that pressure on one person, and it can bring in diverse set of skills, right? Like how I was talking about, Ainsley might be more responsible, thinking of her in the future, more of a caregiver, matronly kind of person, where Ronan would be more like, go brush your teeth. Like, come on, I'm not fighting you, just go do it, right? So you have different approaches, and sometimes them working together is going to be a much broader support system for your child in a better situation. Um, so who could be on this team approach or a micro board? Trusted family and friends, maybe professionals. In this one case I'm thinking of a family that I have, um, they don't have any immediate family that would be the natural caregiver, but they have professionals that have been their child's caregiver, advocate, therapist for a number of years. And so sometimes those people will take on limited roles in a team approach here. When you do this, it's very important to define roles and responsibilities, right? You also want to make sure you have succession set up. If one person can no longer do it, does it all just fall to the next person, or is that person replaced, right? Because things in life happen, and while I might have the capacity to take this responsibility on today, I may not in the future, or my health may deteriorate, or I may pass away. So who's going to replace me? So you want to have clear roles, responsibility, and succession of how that works in the future, and clear communication and coordination. The micro boards, or even a trust that has multiple trustees, right? They work really as a business, or as a board that runs and makes those decisions jointly and within a structure. So that is definitely something to consider, and something that is becoming more and more popular. Um, So what are some of the areas that we need to kind of next we're going to delve into the different areas that we need to consider and we need to communicate to that next generation of care. All right. I have a binder system. Some of you on the call are my clients. Let me pull it up here for you. Sorry, I should have had it ready. I have a resource binder that I give to all my clients that outlines all of these areas so that communication is there. If something were to happen to me, my husband would have no idea, right? This is my divide and conquer. This is my responsibility in the family. So being able to pass that on, and I know and if you can choose, there is a program, I don't know if you all have it or if the ARC of the US has it. It's like Danny Plan or Holy Plan.
There's Danny's plan, so you can
Yeah.
pay for a subscription and it's online is my understanding, so you have everything in one place and you can have multiple people access it. So it's very similar to a binder. I'm thinking back to when I worked in residential. You had a financial binder, you had a medical binder, social binder. Danny's plan allows you to do that, and you can do that online.
Yeah, and so my version is like that. I put it in my client's financial portals so they can access it digitally, or they can have a copy, hardcore copy if they are more of a paper person. But there are online services like Danny's Plan, and I've seen others advertised out there. To me, I don't care what program you use what works best for you. Just have something in line that's going to cover all of these areas. So let's start first with what are these essential areas that we need to educate and support the next line of caregivers. And then we'll delve into each one. Medical needs and healthcare, legal and financial, educational and vocational support, daily living and personal care, and social and emotional well-being. I add in my binder a couple kind of even dig it down a little bit deeper. Like I have a section just on Medicaid. I have a section just on Social Security. So you can be as in depth as you need to be, right? Um, this was the previous screen. Sorry about that. Um, so when we talk about hiring the future caregivers, um, they can, if we don't have family members that can take this on and who can really delve into each of these 5 areas that we're going to get into, right? Um, oh, went too far. Then we could possibly have to hire this out, right? This is something we really want to discuss as we're doing this transition in this life care plan, because that is a huge expense inside a special needs trust. If we need to hire a corporate trustee, or even just the cost of a pooled trust, right? That is a cost that we want to make sure we're allotting for inside our plans. Life care managers that are going to kind of oversee what's going on in the person's life, serving as their guardian potentially, or casework manager, trying to make sure everything in their life is going smoothly, and making sure that whomever that we hire is committed to that long-term support, and that we have a succession plan in there. Because that plan might be, okay, my kids are going to take over as trustees of our family trust, but if they can no longer do that, I give them the opportunity to hire a corporate trustee or utilize a pooled trust of the Arc of Northern Virginia, right? Like making sure we plan for that in our documents is very important. So let's dig into the medical needs and advocacy part. So, all of our kids are so different. Some of us may have no medical concerns. Some may be incredibly medically complex, right? Um, but along the line, there's some diagnoses there that has in some way created the disability that our child is struggling with, right? And that is managed by a team of doctors or differing specialists. So we want to make sure we have all of this well documented for the next generation. What is the actual diagnosis? What are the treatments? What are the medications and appointments? And whenever I say medications, it's not just important to note what are they on now, but what have we tried in the past that didn't work? And when did we try it? Right? Like, so, I talk about my kids all the time, but we're trying new meds for my daughter again right now at 20. We haven't changed meds since 2017. Okay. So when she tried meds, maybe way back when, that was before she was a teenager. So how her body reacts might be very different now. So, but it's also important for me to be able to tell the doctor she had a horrible reaction to Concerta. I don't want to try that again, even if it's just for a day, right? I'm not willing to take that risk. So, just being able to document what previous medications, previous surgeries, previous testing, where all of that documentation is for that next generation. Um, Navigating insurance and benefits. Medicaid is not fun, right? But what is our child's insurance situation now, and what will it be in the future? What will it be once I'm gone? Are they on, I'm a federal employee and they're now covered for life. Will they eventually just be Medicare and Medicaid, dual enrolled? What does that look like, and what services and benefits do they receive? And like I said, keeping that medical history and emergency plan handy so that that next generation has it. Legal and financial planning. Okay, I could do a whole multiple seminars just on this one slide, right? So, um, and we have, I've recorded lots of seminars with the Arc of Nova on all of these topics. So, that's definitely something to help share with the next generation. But what type of special needs trust do you have set up? First party, third party, both? Is it administered by the family? Do you have a set trustee? Are you utilizing a pooled trust like the Arc of Northern Virginia? Do you have an ABLE account? What do I need to know as the new trustee coming in on how I need to manage this trust? How do I manage the ABLE account? What do I need to do? Where are these accounts? All of that can be very overwhelming, so we want to prepare that ahead of time. Guardianship or powers of attorney, supported decision-making, whatever that continuum of care and support looks like, we want to make sure that next generation knows it and knows the options and why is the parent we chose one option versus another, and why maybe we could see that it might need to change in the future if XYZ happened, right? Or, what all of that will look like and what your hopes and wishes are. Life insurance and future funding. How are we going to fund that special needs trust? And what do we want that funding to be used for? The letter of intent is really, so many parents will say to me, oh yeah, I know I need to do that. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. It's one of the most important things that we do, because it really tells that person all of the stuff that is in our head and in our hearts, right? Um, Everything from, she will only eat an Eggo waffle with Nutella for breakfast. Like, that is it every day. Don't change it. It won't work. Let it go. Don't fight that battle. To, you need to fight the battle of making sure she washes her face, right? Like, this is the battle I pick. This is the hill I'll die on every day, right? So letting the next generation or the next caregiver, even if that's not a new generation, my letter of intent really is directed right now towards my husband, of these are the things you need to know that I do that you're not involved in, right? And this is what I want for our daughter in the future. It helps so much in administering the trusts and administering our responsibilities as guardians, or how, even in a case of someone who does supported decision making, just letting that person know what you want. And it doesn't have to be a written letter. It can be a video. It can be anything. You just need to get that information. It can be a list of bullet points of random thoughts you have through the course of a month. Write them down, stick them in a folder, write letter of intent on it, right? At least it's getting the information. It doesn't have to be pretty calligraphy or writing in cursive, because my son won't be able to read my cursive writing anyway. I think we sometimes put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get this letter right, that we kind of become paralyzed by it. So we want to have something, So get down what you can.
Courtney, I was going to chime in and remind families that they can always update that too. So
Yes.
you mentioned the month, right? And so maybe you write down the thoughts for the month, and then comes April and all of a sudden you see something you hadn't thought of. Go back and just add it. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people forget that they can always customize and add.
Yeah.
It's not locked, or it's not set in stone. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So.
Your letter of intent's not a legal document, so you don't have to go back to your attorney to get it changed, right? And even your trusts and your, all of that, that's not set in stone either. Like, it can be changed. Yes, an attorney's going to have to change your trust, but it can still be changed, right? Um, so education and advocacy support, it this can go on well past just high school, as we were talking about with vocational programs and job supports. um Transition planning, and we use the word transition planning in a couple of ways. Like, I'm talking about transitioning care from one generation to the other, but also the biggest transition is from school to adulthood, right? And what we want that to look like, and what life skills are needed at that point. um if your child is younger, um what is the current IEP or 504 plan? Who are some people that they can reach out to? Because they're probably not there. I mean, no matter how well you prepare them, this is not an area that likely your other children or family members have done before. So they're probably going to need some support from an educational advocate, or ARCs, or wherever they live, to get the support they need to understand what they need to do in an IEP meeting, or whether that's education or employment, right? Um, Daily living and personal care, so like I said, it can be a team approach. Like, the person that's taking care of the finances and the IEPs and light medical insurance and all of that could be very different from the person that is there every day doing the daily routines, taking your child out into the community, or making sure that they've eaten and bathed, or have hired an attendant to do that, right? Whatever that looks like. Um, because that caregiver is going to be responsible for the daily routine and schedule, personal care and hygiene needs. That's going to, when you're choosing that next generation, you need to think about, okay, if my child needs help with hygiene, is this the person that's going to be able to do that? Would they need to hire somebody to do that? What does that look like? Transportation and mobility support. If your child's wheelchair bound or needs, significant mobility support, is the caregiver physically able to do that? Important things to think about, because what safety measures will they need, or home modifications that will they need, if they are moving from your home to a caregiver's home. Um, and the social and emotional well-being, I think we've really focused, on our child's life, on their social and emotional well-being. Here, I really want to kind of shift that focus to the social and emotional well-being of the next caregiver, right? Especially if that's going to be one of your other kids, right? They're going to need that support network like we talked about. But they're also going to need social interactions and friendships that are going to understand and support what could be a new lifestyle for them. How are they going to address behavioral mental health needs of your child? And how is that going to impact family and community connections, right? Is your child becoming the caregiver going to change the family dynamic? One of the things I talk about when people are saying, should I use a pooled trust? Should I not? And I'm like, well, okay, your child's high functioning. Do you want them to ask the Ark of Nova for money to go on vacation, or do you want them to ask their brother? right? Which is better for the family dynamic? Lots of things to think about here in relation to everyone's well-being, yours, the kids, and the future caregivers. The transition of care plan. Yeah, somebody said to me, do you have a like a form I can fill out for this? And I don't. Anna, do you have one at the ARC? I don't. I've never seen anything that's kind
No,
of
it's a great idea. We have the trust plan, which helps direct how a pooled special needs trust should be managed and things that we should be aware of, but
right.
not a transition care plan. I think the closest, and this is tapping into former case management, the individual support plan. For anyone that has the DD waiver, there's a section that talks about what does the future hold. And typically there's like a nice little paragraph, but it's not a robust step by step of
Yeah.
what it looks like. So
And I think that part of that is it looks so different for everyone, right? That I think it would kind of be hard to come up with something that I think it would just be so generic. I don't know if it necessarily would be helpful. It but it needs to include everything that we've discussed today, right? We need to identify and educate those future caregivers. We need to document all that important information as well as our preferences, our hopes, and our dreams, everything in our head and our hearts, like I said. Then we need to establish who that team is and communicate this plan to them. We need to allow time frame for that adjustment. And does this transition happen at a certain time? I have some clients that are, in their 80s now, and the conversation is, do we want to transition into that next housing situation now while you're alive? Or is it going to happen abruptly when you're gone? Right? What does that look like? And, we want to keep our kids with us as long as we can, but it might make it harder if they're losing their house and you in the same time. So allowing that time frame for adjustment for everyone, I think is important, and kind of talking through what would be best for your child and for the new caregiver as well as for yourself. And the last part of creating the plan is reviewing it and updating it, right? Like this is something that we need to do with all of our legal stuff and financial stuff, but also with all of our care plans. IEPs at school are done every year. Work plans are done every year. Just like that, your transition care should be looked at routinely, right? Or your transition care plan, sorry. Is what we set up in 2025 still work? Or do we need to modify it, right? Resources and support. So we all know, depending upon our child's diagnosis, what county we are in, what city we're located in, what are the good sources of training programs. I think the Arc of Nova by far is one of the greatest for providing so much educational support. But we all have our other little areas too that we know of, or, I'm part of this listserv, or, things like that that help educate. Passing that information on to the next generation of caregivers helps. Um, if you've worked with an education advocate in the past, or of one you would want to work with, making sure that that contact information is there for the next generation. Your legal and financial planning resources. What attorney did you use? What financial advisor are you using? Um, and are those necessarily, you want to make sure that when it comes to the legal side, you want an elder care law. That's the specialty that encompasses disability. And on the financial planning side, chartered special needs consultant is the designation that we carry that shows that we have this specialty and have passed the examinations on the government resources and planning strategies. So you want to kind of look for those designations inside there. the social and emotional support groups that we talked about, local nonprofits, passing on these resources to that next generation so that they know where to turn when they have a problem. I always end with this quote before we go into questions, but fair is not equal. Fair is everybody getting what they need to be the most successful. This picture hung on my refrigerator for years. Actually, my youngest took it down one day and said, "Mom, I think we all know what this means. Can we get rid of it?" It was so tattered and torn, but we did. But it is still, woven into the fabric of my family, right? That things don't always happen on the same time frames. But we want to make sure all of our kids are cared for, and supported in the best way that they need. And by planning, we are helping all of our kids. If I don't have a plan for Lily, it will be much harder on her siblings, right? So whether the siblings are part of that plan or not, is still yet to be determined, right? They're young. We'll see. But not having a plan is not fair to any of them. So why don't we open it up to questions? I cannot see the Q&A, Anna, so I'll let you read me some questions if there's any in there.
We don't have any yet, but I
Oh, come on,
encourage
people, give me some
anyone.
questions.
And then the same applies if you'd like to just ask it aloud. On the bottom of your screen, you should have a button that says react. If you select that, you should be able to raise your hand and I'll be able to call on you so that you can ask a question aloud.
I hope if nothing else, this kind of got the juices flowing of what do I need to start thinking about? What do I need to consider? And what it will look like. I think that futures planning in general for families like ours, it's that elephant in the room. We all know we need to do the legal stuff. We need to do the financial stuff. We need to do the softer parts of it here with the transition planning, but none of those are necessarily on fire, right? And we fill our day with trying to handle, all of the other complexities of life and fighting with insurance companies and a caregiver who didn't show up for work that day, all of that kind of stuff. But we know it's there and it's an added stress that we can just feel until we begin tackling it. And I think once we begin tackling it, that stress does get relieved.
So
Looks like we do have a couple
we have a
questions.
couple.
Yeah.
So the first one, Courtney, can you please create the worst possible scenario when no relatives are available?
So, actually, Anna, with your background, you probably can have more stories on that front than I. Why don't I let you take that one?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So just a little context before I became the director of trusts, and I know, Courtney, you know my background, but so everyone else can get caught up. I worked in residential services, and so I supported various people that were already living in group homes, or maybe they were living in supported environments. I actually helped transition certain people who were living in the Northern Virginia Training Center back into community living. And so I have seen quite a bit in terms of residential services. And then I moved into a support coordinator role where I was helping to coordinate services for people with developmental disabilities. And so I have seen quite a bit. I'll say, when I was starting in this field, a lot of the people I was supporting had been living in a group home since 1992 because their parents fell, ill or they passed away. And the person moved in with no natural supports whatsoever. And in that case, what I did see was residential providers typically will stand in and do their best to step into that role and make sure that the person residing in their program is being cared for, advocated for, and really adopted as a family, if you will. But in those scenarios, you really have to be considering, what do the wraparound supports look like? It's not a family member, but there are government benefits out there that will make sure that your loved one is cared for, and has access to being, supported to the best of their ability. And I'll say, in other circumstances I've seen where there are parents and they have their loved one living with them, but then one parent passes away and the other one starts to age, and there's a sibling, but they live they live abroad. At that point, I often see families, and I'm talking more from a pooled trust or that advocate component, where maybe you don't have the full confidence of a paid caregiver in terms of maybe a waiver provider to do everything. You might look at a private pay case manager who steps in. There's no bias there. They understand the benefits, and their sole obligation is to make sure your loved one's cared for. And so you can start that conversation now if you know that there's no one to step in. Look at those entities and see if you can start having a conversation and creating that transition plan, so that the private pay case manager essentially will step in as a family member by proxy, if you will. And you have a letter of intent and your explanation of what your expectations for that person to do would entail. And I know it's really, I've heard it many times, it's terrifying. You have your loved one, you're trying to set them up for success, and you really don't have enough resources because you do so much. But at that point, I would say start looking at providers that might be able to step in. Yes, there's a fee associated with it. But that's the best case scenario of the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario of the worst case scenario is you can't afford that private pay case manager. And just know that, the government benefits are going to have to step in, and there are people that are being compensated by Medicaid to make sure that your loved one is living comfortably, with dignity and happiness to the best of the ability of the government services. That's my best. Courtney, I don't know if you have anything to add to it.
No, that's exactly, I mean, the worst case scenario is really Medicaid governmental supports, right? That the government steps in and kind of takes over that scenario. And having put a plan in place where you could you have a trust that can compensate to have a paid life care manager in that role, or case manager that can make sure that Medicaid's doing what Medicaid's supposed to be doing, and that the group home is living up to the standards that we would want it to live up to, and that, they're doing things like taking your child out into the community, and, they're doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. Is kind of a way to help eliminate that worst case scenario. But in any case, planning helps. Any sort of planning we can do in advance is the best,
The other resource I would throw out there is if the person with the disability doesn't have the capacity, and maybe the parent is a guardian. And when that parent passes away, or whoever the family member or friend is passes away, and there's no successor guardian, you can always look at a guardianship of last resort, public guardianship program. And that's at least in Virginia, that's run through DARS, Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, where someone could be referred to a guardian that would stand in and be an advocate for the person with the disability. So.
All right, looks like we have a couple more questions here.
So you've got a shout out. So much appreciated for your empathy, first person stance in the presentation. You get them and you help them feel seen. So thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Next one, I wasn't familiar with microboards. It seems like the biggest challenge with this would be filling individuals who are willing to put in the time and accept the responsibility. Do you have any suggestions for ways to overcome this?
So the easiest way to overcome it is financially, right? If it's not somebody who has a family or friend connection that is willing to do the work out of the goodness of their hearts, microboards can be set up with a compensation structure, so if you are, hiring somebody in the community, maybe a prior therapist or caregiver or, friend or whomever that you would like to fill those seats on the micro board, there can be compensation for them, just like you would compensate a corporate trustee or a private care manager. You can set that up. And I've seen that kind of be the best way. I've also seen uh, people say, I don't thank you for the offer to compensate me, but I don't need to. I don't need the compensation. I'll waive it. So it just kind of depends on the scenario.
All right. So the next one, being one of those families without siblings or family to be our son's guardian. The daughter of a friend has agreed to be the guardian after our deaths. How can we provide her with an annual fee through the trust to compensate her for the role of helping our son, e.g. as trust protector, etc.? How do we find a list of paid case managers as suggested?
Okay, so the first part of that question, it can be written into the trust agreement that this is the fee. I believe that can be written into the guardianships. That I'm not as familiar with. Because that's not on the financial side of things for me. But I know that there can be a compensation for it. How do we find a list of paid case managers, as suggested? I'm sure there are a bunch in your resource list, Anna, at the ARC. I know that the first one that comes to my mind is Paladin Care, but there are a bunch of organizations in the area that do that. Nancy Mercer's team, I believe, does that as well. I can't think of
Inclusion
Inclusion
consultants.
Consultants, yes.
Yep.
And
Elder Tree is another one, and there's another one called Disability Advocates, I believe. But they should be in our resource library, and if not, you can always submit a request through the information referral portal or reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to source some of those resources for you to explore.
yeah. So yeah, how do you find that paid person or caregiver? Um, if there aren't people that you kind of know in the community or, friend of a friend or, a family friend that, in that next generation is willing to step up. Um, there are companies like the ones that we have just mentioned for that. Um, and what I see another one here. How much money does one need? How do I know if I have a will, um, or will have enough to develop? Oh, it just jumped on me. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I moved
Have
another
enough
one.
on the right or on the right track. Um, yes, the biggest answer is it depends, right? So it depends on really the what the costs are. So having a financial plan yourself is one of the first steps. So how I tackle this in my practice is a special needs trust and care for your child once you're gone or even in your retirement is going to be taken care of in two ways: inheritance or life insurance. Those are the main things that go into a special needs trust. We can stick money in it throughout the course of our lifetime, but that is usually not the huge infusions that we need. Um, the biggest money comes in from inheritance and life insurance. But the question comes to me all the time, well, how much do I need? And it is a very case specific situation, right? Like a gentleman who wants to stay, they want to keep him in the house, but he's not able to care for the house or care for himself. They're going to need additional supports beside just what the Medicare attendant would do. They're going to need a life care manager. They're going to need a property manager for the house, right? They're going to need somebody to come in and clean the house. So we look at and really kind of create a financial plan for your adult child. And what if you were gone in the housing situation you want for them, what that will look like, right? Is the housing situation completely covered by their Social Security check? Is it something that's going to include private pay? Do we need a life care manager? Do we need a micro board? Do they need high-speed internet because they love to stream and play really complex games, right? So they're going to need a new computer or iPad every X number of years. Like, we create a plan for you first, so we know how much money you're going to end up with, right? When you pass at the age of 90, what's going to be in your plan that your child will inherit? And how much of your inheritance goes to your special needs child versus another child or another family member? And then what life insurance do you have that would additionally be going in there? Or what life insurance do we need to buy to make up the delta of what you have versus what you need? That's how I look at that. I inflate it for inflation for how many ever years, but we're really looking at from the time that you're no longer supporting them until the end of their life expectancy, how much that is per year. And that's what we need to fund the trust with. The next question is the next one. How do you schedule an appointment with me? Very easy. You can go to my website, cloverleafwealth.com, and click on the schedule an appointment. You can also email me or call me and we can get one scheduled. I do a free consultation for anyone who's attended any Arc of Nova seminars. Overall reputation of Northern Virginia group homes. Anna, I think you would be better at that one than me.
So my answer to this would be, it depends on the provider that you're looking at. And I think a lot of people think one group home is the same as another group home because they're offering the same service. But it's so important. I can't speak to the overall reputation because each provider offers different services and each group home is different. What I will say is do your research, ask for a tour. Ideally, if you can do a tour, do it when there are other residents that are home. Don't do it in the middle of the day when all of them are at the, work or maybe a supported employment or a day program. You want to go when the house is alive, if you will. And you can always request that your loved ones stay for dinner. Or, I remember we used to do when we were at the point where someone was almost ready to move in, but they were at that final step, maybe an overnight stay. And that way you get to really experience what it'll look like once your loved one were to move into, say, that program that you've done your research on. You have a sense of it before you've signed off on any kind of fee agreement or a lease. And then the other thing I say is maybe they look great on paper. Maybe you did the tour and everything felt great, but after a week or two of the person having moved into the program, you're no longer comfortable. I just like to stress that there's nothing binding in terms of just because your loved one moved into a group home doesn't mean they can't move out. And I know that's scary because you're kind of making the leap and hoping it works. But I think it's really important for families to know, if it doesn't, that's okay. Take a step back, try again. The other thing I like to plug in is group homes are great, but there are very different layers of residential services that you should explore because, a group home is great for one person, but it might not meet the needs of another. And you can look at more integrated housing options. So maybe the person can get an apartment through a state rental assistance program or a housing choice voucher, and you put a reasonable accommodation in place for that person to have a live-in attendant because they're used to living in an apartment or in a house with, you or whoever their family is. Maybe moving into a 4-person group home is going to be overstimulating for them because you have to share that space with so many people and the staff's there 24/7, but there's less autonomy than living in an apartment. And I know apartments sound scary sometimes because it's what happens if, the fire alarm goes overnight. Having that live-in attendant's a great accommodation. The other thing is you can always look at something like sponsored residential or supported living. Supported living is very similar to having an apartment. The person living there, they're usually in their own apartment or maybe they have a roommate, but they have access to staff 24/7 on property. So maybe they're happy as a clam alone for, 4 hours, but they need someone to come check in on them. Supported living gives a little bit more independence while still offering that net of safety supports that someone's on property at all times. So I hope that helps. And I would say, we have quite a bit of information on our website about options that you might consider for future living arrangements. And I would also encourage you to, if you have a DD waiver, talk to the support coordinator and ask what residential services are out there and tour programs and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions of the staff and the program managers. That's honestly, in my experience, the most telling when you're shopping around. Courtney, I don't know if you had anything to add to that, but that was just my experience in Roswell.
I'm sitting there taking your answer all in. I think that, like you said, we think of group homes and we're like, oh, I don't want my kid there. But there's good and bad everywhere, right? So it's just really finding the best situation for your child and your arrangement and doing your research. I think Lucia's comment is in relation to one we had answered before. Just clarification. Does Lucia, let us know if you have a further question there.
It's the same will apply to the next one, which it just says
no,
hi, Anna, comma. I think enter might have gotten hit earlier.
Yeah.
The how to schedule an appointment with you, is that for Courtney or is that for Anna? Okay, so right now, the way that we're moving forward with consultations, what I would first encourage is we offer complimentary consultations. It's a 30-minute consultation where we're going to discuss the plan for the future and how the Arc of Northern Virginia might step into that plan to support with a special needs trust. If you're looking for that appointment, the first thing we ask you to do is attend a Trust Talk Tuesday. And the reason being is the Trust Talk Tuesday is offered twice a month. And that is focused on getting you the basic understanding of what our program offers, so that then you can come to that consultation prepared to discuss, okay, now I know everything the ARC's going to be able to do. Let's talk the specifics about your situation. So I would say first attend a Trust Talk Tuesday and then send me an email and let me know that you're ready to come to a consultation, and I'll help get that scheduled. And my email is on our website. It's anna.hughes@thearcofnova.org. And I will go ahead and put that into the chat as well.
And Anna's with one N.
Thank you. Oh, that was to you, Courtney. So hold on 1 second. Everyone, there we go.
Yeah, I was emailing ANNA about, I don't know, like a month ago. I was like, she always answers me back. Why didn't I hear back? And then I look, I'm like, oh, because I misspelled her name. Me of all people who have a name that everybody misspells, because my dad misspelled it when he did my birth certificate. You would think I'd be a little more quick on the uptake, but well, it looks like we've run out of questions. So thank you, Anna, for having me today. It is always wonderful presenting with you all. And anybody who is on the call, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm glad to. I do offer a free consultation as well on the financial side. And we will go ahead and wrap it up.
Thanks so much, Courtney, for joining. It was a pleasure. And again, thank you all for joining as well. I'll be sure to send this out and we'll put it on our YouTube channel as well.
Great. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.